Good day. I am Jesusa Santiago, and I will be discussing the fiscal policy in the Philippines. What is fiscal policy? Fiscal policy refers to the measures employed by governments to stabilize the economy, specifically by manipulating the levels and allocations of taxes and government expenditures. Fiscal measures are frequently used in tandem with monetary policy to achieve certain goals. In the Philippines, this is characterized by continuous and increasing levels of debt and budget deficits, though there have been improvements in the last few years. The Philippines government main source of revenue are taxes, with some non-tax revenue also being collected. To finance financial deficit and debt, the Philippines relies on both domestic and external sources. The external sources of financing. These are number one, program and project loans. This is that the government offers project loans to external bodies and uses the proceeds to fund domestic projects like infrastructure, agriculture, and other government projects. Number two, the credit facility loans. Number three, zero coupon treasury bills. Number four, global bonds. And last is the foreign currencies. Next is the domestic sources of financing. These are the treasury bonds, facility loans, treasury bills, bond exchanges, promissory notes, and term deposits. Role of fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is the use of government revenue and expenditure to influence the economy and meet the macroeconomic goals. The government's revenue and expenditure form its budget. If the revenue collection in the form of taxes equals its expenditure, it's a balanced budget. If revenue exceeds expenditure, the government has a budget surplus. And on the other hand, if the expenditure exceeds revenue, it's a budget deficit. A government follows a neutral fiscal policy when the economy is in equilibrium. In such case, the government's expenditure is fully funded by the tax revenue. A government follows expansionary fiscal policy during times of recession. It may reduce taxes or increase expenditure in order to stimulate the economy. This is to increase the demand, growth, and employment. The government may follow contractionary fiscal policy to reduce fiscal deficit or pay down government debt. To do so, it may increase taxes or decrease expenditure, which will decrease demand, growth, and employment. Fiscal policy is based on Keynesian economics, which believes that the government can influence the macroeconomic productivity levels by changing the taxes and spending. Such influence can curb inflation, increase employment rate, and stabilize the value of money. Monetarists, however, believe that the effects of fiscal policy are only temporary, and they advocate the use of monetary policy to control the inflation. Fiscal policy can be discretionary or non-discretionary or automatic stabilizers. A discretionary fiscal policy refers to the deliberate changes in government spending and taxes in order to stabilize the economy. For example, the government decides to increase its capital expenditure on road infrastructure. On the other hand, automatic stabilizers are the automatic changes in the tax and spending levels because of the changes in economic conditions. They help stabilize business cycles. For example, when the economy is expanding, the tax revenue increases, and vice versa. They will also be lower government spending in the form of unemployment benefits. Economists have observed that automatic stabilizers can reduce the volatility of the economic cycle by up to 20%. How fiscal policy works. Fiscal policy is based on the theories of British economist John Maynard Keynes, also known as the Keynesian economics. This theory basically states that the governments can influence macroeconomic productivity levels by increasing or decreasing tax levels and public spending. This influence in turn curbs inflation, increases employment, and maintains a healthy value of money. Fiscal policy is a very important to the economy. What are the tools of fiscal policy? Number one, revenue tools. Revenue tools refers to the taxes collected by the government in various forms. The taxes can be direct or indirect. Direct taxes are taxes levied on the income or wealth of individuals and firms. This includes income tax, wealth tax, estate tax, corporate tax, capital gains tax, and social security tax. While indirect taxes are taxes levied on goods and services. This includes sales tax, value-added tax, and excise duty, etc. Number two is the spending tools. Spending tools refer to increasing or decreasing government spending or expenditure to influence the economy. Government spending can be in form of transfer payments, current spending, or capital spending. Current spending includes expenditure on essential goods and services such as health, education, defense, and etc. Capital spending is the public investment in infrastructure such as roads, hospitals, schools, and others, while transfer payments are the redistribution of income from taxpayers to those requiring support, for example, unemployment benefits. It also includes interest payments on government debt. What are the objectives of fiscal policy? Number one, full employment. It is a very important objective of fiscal policy. Unemployment reduces the level of production, and hence the level of economic growth. It also creates many problems to the unemployed people in their day-to-day life. So the country tried to remove unemployment and attain full employment. Full employment refers to that situation when there is no involuntary unemployment in the economy. To attain this objective, government should increase its spending, lower the personal income taxes, lower the business taxes, or employ a combination of increasing government spending and decreasing taxes. However, in practice, it is difficult to achieve full employment, as the factor markets are not perfect. Factor units may lose their jobs and may not get the new jobs immediately. Next objective is the price stability. Both sharp rise and sharp fall in general price level are not desirable. It is because sharp rise in prices makes many goods and services unaffordable to the consumers, whereas sharp fall in prices discourages the producers to produce goods and services. So, price stability is desirable. However, it should be noted that the principle that general price level should be reasonably stable is generally accepted. The determination of exact trends which are most satisfactory from the standpoint of welfare of society is difficult. There are following three alternative points of view regarding the price stability. Number one, it is sometimes argued that a slightly downward trend best serves the interests of the community as a whole. because the gains from increased productivity and lower costs would be shared among all persons and society instead of going chiefly to the workers in the industries affected. On the other hand, a downward trend would increase the difficulty of maintaining full employment because of its adverse effects on investments and business optimism. Furthermore, such a trend appears to be impossible of attainment in the light of present-day union strength and policies. Number 2. A gradual increasing general price level has likewise been advocated, primarily because it would encourage investment and lessen labor strife, since annual money wage increases would be possible. However, this alternative would produce a gradual worsening of the economic position of the fixed income receivers. And the third alternative point of view, a compromise between the other two, regards a perfect stable general price level as the optimum. The gains from greater productivity would go primarily to the workers in the industries, but the injury of the economic well-being of the fixed income groups would be avoided, as well as dampening effects of declining prices. The third objective is the economic growth. It is also an important objective of fiscal policy. By means of higher rate of economic growth, the problem of unemployment can also be solved. However, it may create some problems in the maintenance of price stability. And last objective is the resource allocation. Resource allocation refers to assigning the available resources of the economy to the specific uses chosen among many possible and competing alternatives. It gives answer to what to produce and how to produce questions of the economy. Fiscal policy should ensure the optimum allocation of the resources. It should divert the resources from unproductive sectors to the productive sectors of the economy. It is the long-run objective of the government. The emphasis of the government upon the full employment, price stability, and economic growth should not overshadow the research allocation goal. The history of Philippine fiscal policy under Marcos administration since 1981 to 1985. The tax system under the Marcos administration was generally regressive as it was heavily dependent on indirect taxes. Indirect taxes and international trade taxes accounted for about 35% of total tax revenue, while direct taxes only accounted for 25%. Government expenditure for economic services peaked during this period, focusing mainly on infrastructure development, with about 33% of the budget spent on capital outlays. In response to the higher global interest rates and to the depreciation of the peso, the government became increasingly reliant on domestic financing to finance fiscal deficit. The government also started liberalizing tariff policy during this period by enacting the initial tariff reform program, which narrowed the tariff structure from a range of 100% to 0% to 50% to 10%, and the import liberalization program, which aimed at reducing or eliminating tariffs and realigning indirect taxes. Next is Aquino administration from 1986 to 1992. Faced with problems inherited from the previous administration, the most important of which being the large fiscal deficit, heightened by the low tax effort due to the weak tax system, Aquino enacted the 1986 Tax Reform Program, or TRP. The aim of the TRP was to simplify the tax system, make revenues more responsive to economic activity, promote horizontal equity, and promote growth by correcting existing taxes that impaired business incentives. One of the major reforms enacted under the program was the introduction of the value-added tax, which was set at 10%. The 1996 tax reform program resulted in reduced fiscal imbalance and higher tax effort in the succeeding years, peaking in 1997 before the enactment of the 1997 Comprehensive Tax Reform Program or CTRP. Public debt servicing and interest payments as a percent of the budget peaked during this period as government focused on making up for the debt incurred by the Marcos administration. Another important reform enacted during the Aquino administration was the passage of the 1991 Local Government Code, which enabled fiscal decentralization. This increased the taxing and spending powers to local governments, in effect increasingly local government resources. Next is Ramos administration from 1993 to 1998. The Ramos administration had budget surpluses for 4 of its 6 years in power. The government benefited from the massive sale of government assets and continued to benefit from the 1986 TRP. The administration invested heavily on the power sector as the country was beset by power outages. The government utilized its emergency powers to fast-track the construction of power projects and establish contracts with independent power plants. This period also experienced a real estate boom and strong foreign direct investment to the country during the early years of the administration, in effect overvaluing the peso. However, with the onset of the Asian financial crisis, the peso depreciated by almost 40%. The Ramos administration relied heavily on external borrowing to finance its fiscal deficit, but quickly switched to domestic dependence on the onset of the Asian financial crisis. The administration has been accused of resorting to budget trickery during the crisis. This is balancing assets through the sales of assets, building up accounts payable, and delaying payment of government premium to Social Security holders. In 1997, the Comprehensive Tax Reform Program was enacted. Republic Act 8184 and Republic Act 8240, which were implemented during the program, were estimated to yield additional taxes of around 7.4 billion. However, a decline in tax effort during the succeeding periods was observed after the CTRP was implemented. This was attributed to the unfavorable economic climate created by the Asian fiscal crisis and the poor implementation of the provisions of the reform. A sharp decrease in international trade tax contribution to GDP was also observed as a consequence of a trade liberalization and globalization efforts in the 1990s. More prominently, the establishment of the ASEAN Free Trade Agreement and membership to the World Trade Organization and the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation. The Ramos administration also provided additional incentives to export-oriented firms, the most prominent among these being Republic Act 7227, which was instrumental to the success of the Subic Bay Freeport Zone. Next is the Estrada administration from 1999 to 2000. President Estrada, who assumed office at the height of the Asian financial crisis, faced a large fiscal deficit, which was mainly attributed to the sharp deterioration in the tax effort and higher interest payments given the sharp depreciation of the peso during the crisis. The administration also had to pay 60 billion worth of accounts payables left unpaid by the Ramos administration to contractors and suppliers. Public spending focused on social services, with spending on basic education reaching its peak. To finance the fiscal deficit, Estrada created a balance between domestic and foreign borrowing. Next is the Arroyo administration from 2002 to 2009. The Arroyo administration's poor fiscal position was attributed to weakening tax effort and rising debt servicing costs. Large fiscal deficits and heavy losses for monitored government corporations were observed during this period. National debt to GDP ratio reached an all-time high during the Arroyo administration, averaging at 69.2%. Investment in public infrastructure, expenditure for economic services, health spending, and education spending all hit an historic low during the Arroyo administration. The government responded to its poor fiscal position by underspending in public infrastructure and social overhead capital, thus sacrificing the economy's long-term growth. In 1995, RA 9337 was enacted, the most significant amendments of which were the removal of the electricity and petroleum VAT exemptions and the increase in the VAT rate from 10% to 12%. Next is Pinoy administration from 2010 to 2016. The reforms implemented by former President Benigno Noynoy S. Aquino III strengthened the country's macroeconomic fundamentals, which enables the Philippines to bag its first investment grade rating, expand GDP by 6.2%, and lift millions out of poverty during his term. In 2013, the Philippines was categorized as an investment-grade sovereign by all three international credit watchers, Fitch Ratings, S&P Global Ratings, and Moody's Investor Service. The Aquino administration was able to lift 7.7 million Filipinos out of poverty through its Pantawid Pamilya Pilipino program or 4Ps, while its bottoming budget program also allowed for more resources towards rural and poverty reduction programs. Enacting Tax Incentives and Management and Transparency Act and sin tax laws were shaped the country's economic growth prior to the pandemic. Executive Order Number 8 renaming the Build, Operate, Transfer Center as the Public-Private Partnership Center to specifically cater to projects undertaken via BOT, Build, Lease, Transfer, and other public-private sector undertakings. And last is the Duterte administration from 2016 to 2022. Tax Reform for Acceleration and Inclusion Law or the TRAIN Law, officially designated as Republic Act No. 10963, is initial package of the Comprehensive Tax Reform Program signed into law by President Duterte on December 19, 2017. The TRAIN Act is the first of the four packages of tax reforms to the National Internal Revenue Code of 1997 or the Tax Code as amended. This package introduced changes in personal income tax, estate tax, donors tax, value-added tax, documentary stamp tax, and the excise tax of tobacco products, petroleum products, mineral products, automobiles, sweetened beverages, and cosmetic procedures. Public Act Number 11534, otherwise known as the Corporate Recovery and Tax Incentives for Enterprise or CREATE Act, was created by the Philippine Congress in response to the COVID-19 pandemic as a fiscal relief to domestic and foreign corporations doing business in the Philippines. It seeks to amend several provisions in the old tax code with a central focus on lowering corporate income tax rates and rationalizing fiscal incentives to better attract local and foreign investments in the Philippines. The Build program is the Duterte administration's ambitious infrastructure development plan that is composed of thousands of projects to be implemented all over the country. Last, the Bayanihan to Heal as One Act of Republic Act Number 11469 was signed into law by President Duterte on March 26, 2020, upon request of the President of the Congress to give him emergency powers in order to address the COVID-19 pandemic. The law authorizes the President to adopt temporary emergency measures in order to respond to the crisis brought about by the pandemic. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening and have a great day.